I was looking at my favorite website for free items and I saw an ad for a mower. Now that ad was about 30 minutes old and was about 20 minutes away, which means my chances were pretty slim that I would get it. I did have one ace up my sleeve, and that ace turned out to be the fact they did not post their address but only gave a vague description as to their location. When I arrived, this mower was sitting there waiting for me. What's up everyone, and thank you for stopping by. Today's project is a snapper lawnmower, and the problem is that according to this sheet of paper, it's apparently hard to start. Now that seems to be a really weak reason as to give it away, but as you'll see here, they weren't lying. But before I try and give this mower a tune-up, I want to look it over for any obvious problems or issues and then give it a good cleaning. That way we don't get dirt in places where it's not supposed to be, like in the fuel tank or in the carb. And while I clean it, I'm going to answer some of the questions that I often get, or at least some of the more interesting ones. So the first issue I see is a very substantial one. This type of self-propel system uses a friction wheel, which is quite ingenious, but for some reason it looks as though some of the parts have been removed, and unfortunately this drive system has a lot of parts to it, and to replace the parts that are missing would cost quite a lot of money. From what I can see, it looks like everything above the friction wheel has been taken off for some reason. Now, I will admit that the part that's gone was quite complicated, consisting of two bearings and a smaller wheel that rode along a shaft. It's a real shame because this drive system is almost bulletproof, with the only weak spot was everything they removed. One of the coolest things about this mower is that it has a place for you to put your favorite drink. The only thing that would make it better is finding a way to keep your drink cold. Now this leads us to our first comment, which is you should fix it because, like you said, they don't make them like they used to. This is very true, I did say that, but what I didn't say is that they may have stopped making replacement parts for them by now. When that happens, parts become very hard to find and also very expensive. However, in this case, they still make most of these parts, which can't be said by most manufacturers. Even though this mower is almost 20 years old, they still make a lot of the parts for this deck, but the problem is that so many parts need to be replaced that the cost would be very high. They didn't just remove a bad bearing, but the other parts attached to it, so instead of replacing a $16 bearing, I have to replace more than $100 worth of parts. It would just be easier to buy another used mower for parts. After checking the oil, I think I know one reason why it might be hard to start. There's no oil on the end of the dipstick. That means this engine might be damaged due to a lack of oil lubrication. For right now, I'm going to add several ounces to it because I want to try and start it. Be sure and check the oil level to make sure that you do not overfill it. After checking the fuel tank, there seems to be some in it, but I'm going to add just a little bit more, then I'll try and start it. Now, this particular Briggs engine has a primer bulb and it's supposed to push fuel into the carb's throat to help it get started. The sticker says to only press it 3 times, so that's what I'm going to do. So unfortunately, it didn't even try and start. Now it could be that it hasn't been started in a while, so I'm going to do something that's not advised, which is to press the primer bulb more times than it's supposed to be. Partially just to ruffle a few feathers, but mostly out of desperation. This is going to flood the engine, but if I pull it as many times as I did before, it should eventually clear the flood. After pulling it several times, the engine finally started to make some popping noises, so I think it was trying to start. I'm going to give it one more try, and at this point, I'm going to agree that the engine either needs a major tune-up or there's more going on here than we're led to believe. So the engine finally started, and it was on the 4th pull this time. When it did start, the engine blew out a lot of black smoke out of the muffler, so that means it was definitely flooded when it started. More than likely, that's my fault for pressing the bulb too many times, but what's strange is that it even started at all. To me, it means that we have either an ignition issue, a timing problem, or the compression is just too low for a proper startup. That brings us to the next question. What ignition problems would keep the engine from starting? Now, the ignition system is very simple on this type of engine, consisting of a spark plug, its high voltage wire between the plug and the coil, the ignition coil, and finally the magnet on the flywheel. There's no need to do an in-depth review on how each component works, but what's most important is that each is doing their job when it's supposed to. As the engine spins, so will the flywheel, and as the magnet passes by the coil, it'll send an electric current to the spark plug. Now, the magnet is placed in a very specific location on the flywheel, so the spark will happen at a very precise time. If the blades should hit a stump or a large rock, the sudden shock could offset the flywheel and make the spark happen at the wrong time. You can usually tell when this might be the case if you examine the blade to see if there's any damage to it. We'll take a look here in a few minutes. Now, the fix for this situation is to remove the flywheel and examine the key to see if it's been sheared, and if it is, then just replace it, and the ignition timing should return to normal. Another issue would be related to the spark plug itself. The only problem I've ever seen is a plug that has a lot of carbon buildup on it due to the engine burning oil. Although I do not suggest replacing them as part of routine maintenance, I would at least inspect them once a year. Another spark plug issue would be a large air gap between the electrode and the ground. Now, the gap needs to be set to a factory spec for the spark plug to work as intended to. If the gap is too large, the spark might become erratic or might not even happen at all. The fix is to either close the gap or just replace the plug. If you do replace the plug, make sure you check the air gap to make sure it's close to factory spec. Another question I get has to do with cleaning these mowers. Why not use a pressure washer and get it over with? You won't have to waste your time with an old toothbrush. For the most part, they are right. The pressure washer would get rid of most of the dirt and it wouldn't take as long as hand washing. Before I go on, I saw this piece of painter's tape on the side chute and I didn't know why it was there until I took a closer look at it. It turns out to be the spacer for the fuel tank and the block. The only reason why this would be off is to get to the flywheel to inspect the key. Now, this is not good news because it means that someone must have already looked at it and either fixed it or it wasn't broken. When they put everything back together, they must have forgot to install it. The problem is I still have to check for myself to be sure, but I'll still put it back on later so I don't lose it. The reason I even bother using an old brush is because sometimes the dirt comes off better with light agitation as opposed to sheer water pressure. I guess if I had a wand with a brush head on it that delivered soap as well, then I wouldn't have to do it by hand, but the problem is I don't have something like that. The other problem is I can clean specific areas better by hand with precision than using water pressure alone. Now, this has to be one of the biggest chutes I've ever seen on a push mower. You would typically see something like this on a riding mower, so it's strange to see one this size here. It'll make more sense why the chute looks like this when you see the blade that's under the deck, because it has to do with safety. The other issue with using a pressure washer is that I could do a lot of damage to the mower, so I have to make a decision if the deck and engine are able to take the stress from the pressure washer or if I have to do it by hand. I will say that using the pressure washer takes the fun out of cleaning the mower, but if you don't have a lot of time, it's obviously the better choice. Just be prepared to be sprayed with water because of splashback. As you can see, this deck has not been cleaned in a while. I will say that this is probably the biggest cow patty I've ever seen under a mower before. Hopefully the rest of it doesn't look like this. Now, the last topic also relates to the next question. What will happen if I never clean under my mower deck? Now, to be honest, not cleaning under your deck won't stop your engine from starting or keep you from mowing your yard, but it could develop into two big problems. The first is that the reduced underdeck space will not allow the blade to effectively cut the grass. This could cause the engine to bog down and eventually stop. The second issue is the potential for the mower decks to rust out a lot faster than they're supposed to. Now, the manufacturers don't make the mower decks very thick because of cost and weight, but in my mind, they also don't want the mowers to last forever. Otherwise, you'll never buy a mower again from them. Of course, you'll tell everyone how wonderful it is to have a well-built mower and that it's as old as your adult children, but the fact remains, you'll probably never buy another mower unless you break it on purpose. Now, this is a working theory of mine, and it's that mowers are built to last only a certain amount of time, and that number is 3 years. In those 3 years, you'll still have the original oil that you put in it the day you took it out of the box, the original spark plug, air filter, and drive belt. They don't want you to touch any of these components, but instead, use the mower until something fails, at which point you'll just go to the store and buy another mower. So it's basically a race to see which part fails first. The engine might fail to start one day, the self-propel could stop working, the mowing deck might start looking like Swiss cheese, or the wheels could literally fall apart. And I hate to say it, there are plenty of people who fall for their plan and just go and buy another mower instead of replacing a failed part. But the worst part is that most people never do any preventative maintenance to keep these parts from failing in the first place. Maybe I just care too much, or I might be overthinking the whole situation, but it just seems like a lot of people are okay with it. And who knows, maybe when I get too old to turn a wrench or replace a spark plug, I'll just get in line with the rest of the people and buy a battery-powered mower where there's little to no maintenance, only needing time to charge your batteries, and then eventually replacing them. I don't know if you realize it, but these rear wheels are made out of the same material as the deck, which is metal, and it's also quite a bit larger than the front wheels. I assume they wanted these things to last a long time. The strange thing is that I don't know of a current brand of mower that has steel wheels because most are plastic. If you can think of a brand of mower that currently uses steel wheels, I'd like to know about it. I also didn't realize it until I got a closer look, but the front wheels are made out of thick and heavy plastic with a hubcap over it. I still want to clean these up a bit, and I was quite surprised on what they look like after I got the dirt off of them. Now, even though the front wheels are not made out of metal like the rear ones, they're still very robust and are still spinning really well after all these years. Now, I haven't taken them off just yet, but I'm guessing they have ball bearings in them. In fact, once I got them spinning, it took quite a long time for them to stop. Now, with the larger rear wheels and the ball bearings in the front wheels, I can see why they didn't mind disabling the self-propel system. It's really not that hard to push this mower around. Unfortunately, I only have one of the front hubcaps, but I'm still going to install it. One good reason to keep your mower somewhat clean is that you can see if there's a problem with it. If your engine was covered in dirt, it would make it a lot harder to see if you had an oil leak, which left unchecked could cause your engine to fail. If your deck was covered in grass clippings, it would hide the fact that your deck has cracks in it, which could pose a huge safety hazard. So we finally get a good look under the mowing deck, and as you can see, it's really not that bad, and I think the reason for it is because they were using the side discharge instead of bagging the clippings. You can also see this very strange looking blade, which is part of the high vacuum design of this mower. The problem is that with a blade this large, if you happen to run over something like a rock, it has a really good chance of throwing it further due to its size. And that's the reason why the side chute on it is so large. It's to reduce the chances of other people getting hurt. I did look at the blade and I did not see any damage to it that would cause the flywheel key to shear. However, I'm still going to leave it as a possibility as to why this engine is hard to start, so we might still end up looking at the key later on. Now, to keep from having this kind of buildup on the underside of the mowing deck, I would try cleaning it with a garden hose every other mowing. The reason I say every other mowing is because doing it every time could be a bit of a headache. Even if you do it infrequently, it'll extend the life of that deck past that magic 3-year mark. So where did I come up with this magic 3-year number? Well, I had a relative read and follow the directions on their brand new mower to never change the oil, only adding some when needed. After a couple of years, it developed a no-start problem once the engine got hot. After looking at it for some time, I diagnosed it with low compression. This was after inspecting the carb, fuel, and ignition system. I then noticed that the oil was extremely dark, and I asked them about their maintenance routine, which I'm pretty sure you can guess what answer they gave me. After 3 long years without an oil change and absolutely no maintenance, it lasted right at 3 years. It turns out the manufacturer's plans worked out perfectly. Sell a decent mower, let it run for a set amount of time, and then repeat the process. I let my relative know about this game and how it was played, and surprisingly, they said they didn't mind. So apparently a lot of people who were polled and asked how long a mower should last must have checked that box that said 3 to 4 years. My answer would have been written in and would have said, as long as I'm breathing. I hope you enjoyed watching me clean this mower and answer some of your questions. I do plan on doing more of these Q&As, so if I didn't answer your questions, please don't be afraid to ask, and I'll answer them either in the comments, an email, or in a video like this one. Thank you for watching. I really do appreciate your time here. Please feel free to ask me any questions, and I hope to see you in the next video.